everybody. It's T Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Oracle of the Self, ongoing coaching and training. Today is session number 43, and we are still in the deep weeds of the nature of change. And so today we're going to move from what we did last time around, which was about dysfunction, and instead go, well, what is it that really prompts humans to change? Because even you think about this, as much as change is the natural part of the human experience, it's part of every job, it's something that's happening all day, every day, all around us, blah, blah, blah. And as much as we may see value in it and intellectually know that it would make sense for us to do it, and even if we're not so dysfunctional that we can't get ourselves out of bed and get the day going, the truth is that we still somehow, in spite of all of our dysfunction, make changes. And we seem to make good changes, or how about this? More people make good changes more often than people making bad decisions. So we end up progressing, even though there's groups inside of our society that are making terrible choices every single day. It's just a downward spiral to that lowest symptom of dysfunction, which is truly a physical death, could be happening there. Most of the time, we still end up making enough of the changes that we need to make to get life to kind of happen. So I'll stop babbling there for a second and just say, do we all recognize that in spite of all of this stuff that's out there, we still seem to be making a lot of changes? Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we do. And
Yep.
so the question
Every day.
becomes, well, what really prompts humans to change? If it isn't logic and it isn't value, and it isn't whatever else we want to go back and review, if it's not all those kinds of things, it's not even control, what's prompting us to change? And you guys already all know the answer. The answer is tension. So we have to talk about a few definitions of tension we like to use, but this is the whole point we've been trying to get to in the nature of change, that it's not about change, although a change, there needs to be a subject, and so that's what the change really is. And it's not really about control, although we know that control is what people ultimately want as a result of making that change, and that all by itself isn't, there's something else that's going on that really determines. And so we define tension, one of them at least, as being the level of physical, emotional, and intellectual activity a person is experiencing at any given moment in time. So what you're doing with your body, what you're doing with your emotional state, what you're doing with your cognitive abilities, blend all that together, average it all out, and you're going to end up with a certain level of tension. So the level of physical, emotional, intellectual activity a person's experiencing at any given moment in time. I like Chris just said, getting sick and tired of being sick and tired. I put that into a speech I wrote for one of my clients who's trying to get people to actually change. Actually, he was doing something more motivational. But I said, if you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, here's something you can do. But definitely, change occurs when someone says enough. Change occurs when we'll get to it later, but when we finally get to a point where we just say enough already, something's got to give, something's got to change.
KC.
Yep.
So I'm not sure if you're going to get to this shortly. If you are, I could wait. But what would be your definition of stress? Because it's often confused, stress and tension, but I would like to see that distinction.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get into it in great detail, but you're absolutely right. So somehow, some way or another, the word attention and stress ended up getting so commingled in the average person's mind that they really are kind of the same thing. Where instead, in fact, we'll get to the second definition. We can, instead of looking at it from this kind of medical or psychological kind of way, we can look at it from the perspective of energy, of force and power and all that. So, we talked about this before, the two rubber bands. Well, when you take those rubber bands and you start to move the ends, or take that rubber band, wrap around your fingers, start to move your fingers apart, you know that the amount of energy contained inside of that system, that rubber band, is going up. Well, what scientists would probably label that as the amount of tension that's increasing inside of that rubber band is what's really going up. It's the tensile variables that are happening and all there. So tension really works in that regard as well. Yeah, we'll stumble across a few others, but those I think are the ones that we seem to work with more than anything else. It's about a level of activity, but it's also about this amount of energy that something is really pulling from us, demanding from us, etc. All right, so let's take a look. Here's another one, level physical. Yeah, we got that. The next one, the crucial ingredient that determines what changes will be made and when those changes will take place. And this is something, you really have to kind of think about before we start labeling some things in the world of tension. But this tension, it's not just that there's some there needs to be enough of it there that it serves its role as that crucial ingredient. It determines what changes someone's going to make and when those changes will take place. In the absence of tension, this is somewhere, here it is. In the absence of tension, there is no productivity. And then this last one, I said the amount of energy contained in the system. But those are kind of the three definitions we would use the most about that. Any questions about any of those three definitions? Amount of energy, crucial ingredient, physical activity, emotional activity? No? Okay, so now here's a little rule. You can take this one to the bank. People pay attention to where they find their tension. And so whatever it is that's going on inside of your head, that's causing you all this activity, that's building up all this energy, that's taking things to some point of decision or indecision, as we'll talk about in a moment, that's what's going on. We have to have some of that. If we have none of that activity going on at all, then there's going to be no productivity whatsoever. We'll illustrate that just momentarily. People pay attention to where they find their tension. And why do I have two of those slides? Yeah, people pay attention to where they find their tension, but the opposite of that is also true. We do not pay any attention to the things that don't get our attention, that don't cause us any kind of physical or emotional or intellectual activity. We don't need to participate with it. There's no energy in the system of what's going on. There's no change that's really afoot. That we have to pay attention to something like the level of tension to make it happen. So a whole lot of babbling, but you're getting where I'm going with all this. Tension is what it's really all about. And yeah, we want that tension to be about something that's going to help you gain or maintain control. And we'd like that level of tension or that level of control you seek involves some sort of a change that you have the ability to do. We want all the best things to happen, but the bottom line is it's all about tension. And so this is what we think distinguishes us from any of the other kind of programs that you might find out there, particularly ones that refer to themselves as stress management or something along that line. So let's take a look at a couple little graphs and you can see where we're going with all this. Questions, comments? So, yep.
Yeah, as you transition to that, I was thinking of the belt tensioner in car engines.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And if it affects performance of that engine if there's not enough tension on those belts, or if there's too great of a tension on those belts.
That's right. Then you're going to have a real problem. I did a program for a group of dentists, and I said it's like tightening braces. You got to keep the tension high enough so it can produce some sort of a result. If there isn't enough tension, then nothing's going to change. Nothing's going to change. Okay, wait. So people pay attention to where they find their tension. So let's look at a curve. This curve shows the relationship between tension and productivity. So as the level of tension goes up, you'll find a corresponding increase in the level of productivity. And that will continue as tension goes up, productivity is going to go up, tension goes up, productivity goes up, et cetera, et cetera. But there's going to become a level of tension that ends up being too high. And the moment someone hits that level of tension, the level of productivity is going to take an immediate nosedive. It's not a perfect bell curve, but if you went back to the early 1900s when Yerkes and Dodson were proposing the inverted U theory for productivity, they were trying to show the relationship between sensory arousal and productivity. So we would just call it tension today, but they were actually thinking about each of your physical senses, and those senses be getting starting to become more stimulated, more active in what's going on. And at a certain level of sensory involvement, you're going to have optimum productivity. But if there's too little or too much, productivity is going to take a bit of a nosedive. And at least then they depicted it as a perfect bell curve, which is why they called it their inverted U theory of productivity. So, so there it is. So it's an inverted U. We're going up the bell curve, coming down. This is a U shape, but it's upside down. Nevertheless, tension versus productivity takes the shape of this curve. Now, why is it no longer a bell curve? So, and this is probably the only place you will ever see that it takes a nosedive. You're probably going to see bell curves everywhere else you look at this, but it's not a bell curve. Something happened. So why does our productivity take a crumble? Why does it fall? Anybody? This goes back to something we talked about earlier on.
Entropy?
Well, some of it could certainly be entropy, but that would probably keep things low to begin with and probably make someone content again once they arrive back at that point.
That isn't the natural and inevitable side effect of mastery is apathy, is it? That you've mastered it and then you
Yeah,
drop?
but apathy we're going to plot down here. So this is what we really are kind of talking about, that this incidence of dysfunction, do you think over the course of the past 120 years has it become more problematic, more of an issue in society, or is it just the same it was 120 years ago? What do you think? Is dysfunction getting better or worse?
Getting worse because the distraction is there. So, there's even a term coined by Harvard now, AD, so attention deficit, not ADHD, but AD. As they coin it, you're literally a product of the environment. So it's a product of distraction, a product of being overstimulated. And when you're out of sorts, you're feeling too much stimulus than your capacity, and that's something that humans are horrible at gauging.
Right. Let me just add one thing to that let me add one thing to that real quick, because this is the oracle of the self. There also comes a point in time where that individual who is becoming that dysfunction you just characterized it also becomes one of the causes of it, because they're perpetuating it, they're sharing it. So even that, there's a lot of people that are addicted to being addicted, even though there may not be, some specific substance that's really got them locked in physiologically to whatever's going on. But at a certain point in time, I think that dysfunctional people become the messengers of the dysfunction.
Right.
They're the spread of it.
Isn't that what social media does, right? It becomes this bullhorn for people to spread it. That amplifies what they bring to the table.
Yeah, exactly right. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, no, we keep on tolerating higher and higher levels of tension. Now, this might fall in the category of a more advanced concept if we were mapping ChangeWorks out, but you guys already know this is an unusual program. So I'm just going to throw this in, and you can kind of see where it all fits in. Over the course of our lifetimes, have we been conditioned to tolerate higher and higher levels of tension before we find it troublesome enough to bother doing anything definitive to change it?
Seems so.
Yeah. We're not becoming less able to handle tension. We're becoming better and better at it, although better is debatable. We're getting more numb to it. And so in these days, what does an advertiser have to do to get your attention? What does someone who's trying to get you to change your behavior have to do to finally get you to change your behavior? You know, you can tolerate it. And so I think part of this is also pulling a lot of that bell curve, the length of the line itself, quite literally, it's been moved over to the left side of things. So now I'm just this little droopy bit. That's all that's left over after all I have is my level of tension being as high as we seem to have grown accustomed to tolerating. You guys with
Are we really though? Are we really though, T? I mean, with all the mental health issues up, the suicide, the the obesity, all the drug abuse, you really feel we're tolerating it more? I don't know if I
No. I mean that we are all tolerating that increasingly high levels of input, if you will, stimulus is becoming the norm, the routine.
Yeah.
And yes, I do believe that more people are crumbling because of it.
Yeah.
But there are certain people among us who seem to be able to get by, even with this high level of stimulation. I like watching YouTube channels about people who are coming from quiet, sedate countries, and they decide they want to make their first trip to the United States. And for reasons I shall never understand, they think they should start in Manhattan. So, it's like you're just going to like the most upgraded spot we probably have, So can you imagine what effect that has if you've grown accustomed to lower levels of activity, stimulation, et cetera? I mean, Vegas you can put up there as well, but Vegas even seems to be a downgrade movement from the level of constant tension inherent in Manhattan. Yeah. Now, I thought that was as bad as you could get, and then I went to Mexico City. So let me tell you, Mexico City has a a couple of layers of tension thrown onto it, because outside of all of their nice stores, they've got armed guards. And traffic laws are really just suggestions. People really just go wherever they feel like going, wherever they feel like going it. So
gendarmes in the street.
yeah, no, it's just there are what I'm just trying to say is there are places in the world where the level of tension has gotten to be so high, and by tension I mean physical, emotional, and intellectual activity. So as all those things go up, the level of tension goes up, 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 and every time we show ourselves able to handle a certain level of tension, that becomes the new norm for us. And now we can take higher levels and higher levels and higher levels, more bombardment, more messaging, more chaos, and still consider it to be just another day.
Terry Brock is probably one of the most knowledgeable people on AI. He's a professional speaker. And I keep challenging him with infobesity, the stimulus overload and, putting us into our limbic system and all of that. And he said, well, that's not really the problem. And there's a group of them that feel that with AI, that it's a filtering failure. And I agree, we have to filter more, whether it's 300 emails a day or whatever. But I think there's a point where the body and mind can't even keep up with filtering. So do you agree?
That's what this collapse is all about. That's what this collapse is all about. We no longer hit a point and taper gracefully off. We've gotten so good at handling high levels of tension for so long that if you push us beyond that level, you might watch us collapse. Right in that moment. And whether that collapse is physical, emotional, intellectual, or all the above, that's what it's really all about.
Hey, doesn't that connect to because I know you work out, doesn't that connect to that in terms of when you plateau? Because
this is
has adjusted, the body has adapted, that routine.
Right. And so if we go just before that vertical dotted line, this is where the plateaus could very easily occur. But I need to stay on the left side of things because I obviously need to raise the bar if that's, my objective is to get stronger or bigger or whatever, faster, whatever. I need to raise the bar, but if I raise it too far, too fast, this is where injury happens. And by the way, the word that goes on this side, it usually takes me, you know, I would have been done with this long ago to just say, we reach a level of tension that's just plain too much. So how would you describe someone who is experiencing an extreme level of physical, emotional, and intellectual demands? What are they feeling? And some of the audience always blurts out stress. And so we put stress over here. And I say, well, then what happens to productivity when someone hits stress? And they go, it drops. And I go, does it drop ever so gracefully? And the answer is no, it's really much more of a plummet. We hit a breaking point and now we collapse. And so it's just not a perfect bell curve any longer as we kind of look at it. Yeah. So I had a poster in the office I was given for a long client assignment. And I don't think that any of the executives ever saw it because it was on like the back of the door, and whoever was in my office beforehand had it there. But this is what the poster said. You guys no doubt know at least part of it. It said, "We the willing, led by the unknowing, are doing the impossible for the ungrateful. We have accomplished so much for so long, starting with so little, that we are now able to do anything, starting with nothing, in no time flat." And so, you know, and I would show this to the leadership in there and just say, like, this was at least the thought of one person who is in this office, and this office is no longer occupied by them. So have you moved your entire organization up to this point where on the one hand, you think you're getting optimum productivity because you're keeping the level of tension quite high? And by the way, we train companies how to do this, how to move people up to this threshold. You get there in a second. It's the threshold of activation. So we got to get people up there, and we need to keep them up there. Sustained threshold activity is what ultimate productivity is really all about. But we warn them, if you just do one thing that pushes them over the edge, you're going to watch their productivity take an immediate nosedive. So it's not going to taper off. It's not going to be graceful. It's not going to be easy to recover from. You're pushing people, and that's going to lead to burnout, to well, who was Edie, you were talking about suicide. I mean, there's all kinds of horrible things, and it doesn't taper off. Nope. We were at a place where it collapses.
What's interesting to me is that we're getting poorer at even recognizing that. So when we talk about this need to pay attention to, you know, Kathy always done lots of training around somatic, about how people are feeling. And oftentimes people are so numb to this kind of dynamic that when you reach the point of burnout, it's already too late. Like it just doesn't come. That's the culmination.
That's right. Well, and if you look at like Yerkes Dodson, they would say to you that, you see where the dotted line is? It's too close to the high end of the scale for tension. It needs to be smack dab in the middle. In a well-functioning, individual or team or department, company, family, whatever level, in a well-functioning team system, if you will, it's maintaining tension at a moderate level that should get you maximum productivity. But how many of you in your role of consultants realize that in this day and age, in this culture at least, a moderate level of tension is not going to get you maximum productivity? Anybody? Thoughts, comments on that? Is a moderate level of tension going to get you maximum productivity? There is an if that creates a possibility, but you tell me. Go ahead.
I think it's a big if. I don't think it's.
I would say to you that if tension, if a moderate level of tension is generating a maximum level of productivity, not just halfway, but maximum productivity at a moderate level of tension, that would hold true if the person is a functional person.
Right.
when we're looking at the change grid, it's if they're in power, if they're inside of their green circle and deliberately stepping between the green and the red because they've chosen to go and interact with the world around them. That's a much more functional person. They may not need as much tension to get their attention and get that attention directed in some productive kind of a way. I don't think that describes the workforce or the companies that all of us on this call have either worked among, worked with, worked for. I think that there's a whole lot of, well, I didn't say it. I probably should have back for it. The real problem with being dysfunctional is that dysfunctional people don't leave their dysfunction at home when they go to work. They bring their dysfunction with them. And as a result, they create an extension of their psychodramas inside of their corporate setting. And so that's why another book by Ann Wilson Schaaf was The Addictive Organization. So what is it about work that people get addicted to? And what is it about work that ends up causing all the negative side effects of addiction? So, yeah. And where's that happy medium? Well, that's our point. And yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, continue, T. But I was
Yeah,
just going to say, I think that's where the model that you have is so good, because it addresses each individual. It's not theory X, Y, Z, Deming. It's not one size fits all, because that threshold is so individual. And this is the only model I know that addresses it, what your level of tension is going to result in.
Your threshold. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And I agree. I think that's what we need, because like the gurus would teach, and you hear this a lot about this idea of minimal effort for maximum output, right? And they're basing this on, like in medicine, it's called the minimum effective dosage. So they start you with a minimum that will get you the maximum result. Because if they started you out with the maximum, it could possibly kill you.
Yep.
And so they use this med as some kind of training and productivity, and say, yeah, all you need is the minimum effort to produce the maximum results, and that's your sweet spot. I'm like, okay, well, great. What about everyone has different baselines to start with?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, this is the challenge we all have to deal with, whether we are working with an individual client, whether we're applying this to ourselves in the Oracle of Self Spirit, and that we have to recognize that the amount of productivity that you can expect out of us on a given subject in a given situation on a particular day is subject to change. So, today I might not need very much tension. I might already have plenty just of in my own thoughts, my own, self-determination, and all that is all I need to get out there and do certain things. I didn't need to be moved almost into stress before I get certain things done. So something's going to be that variable. And as Edie just pointed out, that variable is the threshold of activation. So the
What is
threshold
your perspective on, if I may ask,
Yes,
I forget the name of those authors that wrote the book Influencer. They're the same people that wrote the book Crucial Conversations, but they talk about the axes of motivation and ability,
okay.
and in terms of how that impacts people's, not only their productivity, but their level of engagement. But I always see motivation not as just a thing, as it is a process, right? Like it's something that you structure. It's just not something that you just do, whether you feel like it or not.
Right. Well,
At that, like motivation would be on the side of the productivity, and ability would be on the side there where you have the tension. They did something to that.
motivation would actually map to drive. So the further outgrid you plot, the more motivated you become, but the motivation is an internal motivation. Where upgrade, you might also find an increased motivation to behave, but it's more coming from a place of self-preservation. Because you've got that, we've said this before, definitive change only occurs 2 places on the change grid. So upgrade changes are driven by what?
External
External factors, and outgrid changes are driven by
internal.
factors. So it's all who's driving the bus. If you're out grid, you're driving your own bus. And if you're up grid, someone's aiming their bus at you. So yeah, yep. Anyway, I would say that in that particular model of ability versus motivation, they're talking about one of our outputs and one of our inputs. So ability for us is an input and drive is an output.
Mm,
Right. So we ask you about your level of tension and then we tell you about your level of drive.
got it.
Because that's where the motivation is coming from. But yeah, motivation is a strange word, but obviously we prefer people be motivated with intrinsic things. So, don't allow the outside stuff to go there. Okay, anyway, let's to finish off our little diagram here. Remember I said that in the absence of tension, there is no productivity. And you can see that right here. If there is no tension whatsoever, there's going to be no productivity because you're oblivious to this. It's off your radar altogether. As you become more aware of something, now you start to notice it. And just noticing something gives us a certain increase in tension. It doesn't make you all that productive, but noticing something may at least get your wheels turning. And so let's say that you're noticing that, I don't know, you need a new car or whatever. And so you're noticing that there seems to be some deals that people are talking about. You've heard it in passing. And so you start to notice the television commercials. You start to notice the ads on the internet or in print, if that still happens in your life. Your level of tension is going up. Because you're seeing more, you're exploring more around it. You decide to go shopping. You decide to stop by a dealership. You decide to go for a test drive. All of these elements of increased productivity towards a particular outcome are being driven by the amount of tension and therefore attention that's coming from whatever it is that's going on. But if there was none of this tension going on, you wouldn't be paying attention to any of it and nothing would be changing. Yes, agree? Yeah. Okay. So now we have to say, well, what's this kind of breaking point be before that? I say to my audiences, now you can see on that curve that there is a level of tension that equals, I'm showing them this, and you can see along the curve that there is a level of tension that equals maximum productivity. And where would that be? And the audience is kind of silent because they're waiting for it. I said, well, it would be at the top. There's a technical term for this. We call this the top. So it'd be at the top of the curve. We do have a name for it. We call it the threshold of activation. Threshold is good enough. The threshold of activation is the level of tension at which someone will take immediate definitive action. Well, change is taking immediate definitive action. So that's what's really going there. We need people to hit their threshold of activation. Unfortunately, the majority of people in the majority of situations require higher levels of tension before they hit their threshold. Why is my threshold at the breaking point of stress? Why is it there? But that's where it is for so many people for so much of the time. So we need people to hit that threshold where they'll actually change. Now, as you'll learn later on in the program, or even from what we've talked about already, the whole point of being a good coach or a good consultant, a good therapist, a good whatever, is to help people lower their threshold of activation. And that's when we talked about before about the heart line and the threshold of activation and the threshold of delegation should ideally lie directly atop the heart line. And that the degree to which the thresholds of activation and delegation deviate from the heart line represents the degree to which dysfunction is interfering with your decision-making and action taking. So thoughts about that? Yep.
Well, I'm thinking that the opposite side of the productivity here is that when someone reaches, some people, when they reach that threshold, that they wind up going in the opposite direction. In other words, they break under the tension.
That's the thing. Because they waited too long, they end up having a bigger price tag to pay for it. So how many of you know people in your, even in your personal private lives, how many of you have met people who just plain waited so long to do something that they know they should have done long ago, that now it's, on the edge of a traumatic experience for them?
Mhm.
Now they're collapsing emotionally, physically. They have no energy left around the whole thing. Why did they wait so long? Why did they wait so long?
But a lot of them are programmed. Don't you think sometimes it's a cultural thing, pull up
Absolutely.
your bootstraps, be tough, yeah, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, we hear about it. It's given to us as a joke, but it's truthful, and that is, guys don't dash to the doctor every time there's a little ache or pain.
Right.
We should have, you know.
Mhm.
We're too stubborn. We don't go, and so we wait until our physical, emotional, and intellectual activity. Put the word pain in there for the fun of it. Aches and pains get to be so bad that we finally go, fine, I'll go.
Sometimes
We hit our
T,
threshold.
that might go back to as a child. I remember my daughter-in-law telling me there was some research done that with little boys, they needed more. I hate to say it, almost like physical punishment, which I never did, but that they, it's almost like if you're an abstract learner or a concrete learner, you know what I mean? That some people can just think about losing weight because they know it's the right thing to do. Other people have to have the doctor say you either lose weight or you die.
Right. And again, look what we're really describing there is different ways that that dysfunction expresses itself.
Yeah.
Why is it that some people, more functional people, I mean, look, go back to the definition of dysfunction. Dysfunction means not operating at optimum efficiency. That's all it means. You're not operating at optimum efficiency. And so that's when the question becomes, well, why don't we do what we know we need to do when we decide to do it? Intellectually, we know. Well, why aren't we? Well, the truth is, truth be told, we do not find our current situation troublesome enough to bother doing anything definitive to change it. We've grown numb to the inconvenience, the pain, the disruption, the chaos, the whatever that's happening in our world. We've just grown numb to it. We can tolerate it. We can handle it. It's no big deal, no big deal. And so we are pushing our threshold further and further up instead of lowering that threshold to be able to do the right things the right way in a more reasonable time frame.
See, I think there are times when the level of tension exceeds someone's experience or their ability.
Yeah.
And that could wind up putting someone in a dysfunctional situation.
That's right. I
But
mean,
I'd like to hear more on the after you make that comment, T, I'd like to hear more on the comment about sometimes it's cultural.
yeah, well, I'll give you a couple of things to give you something from it being cultural. I think the way guys interact with guys is very different than the way that guys interact with women. Hopefully that doesn't make me someone who needs to be canceled. But I just think the guys interact in their own way. I think girls together, women together interact in a unique way. And I think men and women interact in a different way together. So is that fair enough to say we can find enough evidence of that in our own lives to say, yeah, no, I get that.
yeah.
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Just how to meet.
I've watched you talk to some of the guys, and I think I would never say that to my girlfriends, ever, ever.
But for the guys, it's just kind of like, that's just how guys are. We don't, it's not like it's any kind of a big deal. It's cultural. So Tim, that's the first one I think that we can just look at, that close by that just says, I'll throw this to the other guys. If I've told you guys that there's something that I want to do, and you know that I've got everything I need to do it, but I don't follow through and do it, but I keep saying I want to follow through and do it, and I keep coming up with excuses about why I'm not following through and doing it, you tell me what a guy is going to say to me.
Get it done.
That's right. If there could be a lot of choice words, a lot of things I'm going to be labeled, there's all kinds of things because it's an attempt to raise my level of tension to hit the threshold. Obviously, the situation at hand as it is wasn't enough to raise my level of threshold to the threshold.
The listener's level of tension has been lifted to the point of, for God's sake, do something or accept it.
Yeah, right. And that's really it. So I'm going to get confronted by it. Okay. So now this is the difference I want to make. Now, a guy can tell me all of those things, confront me on all those kinds of things. But if Linda says the same things to me, it's a totally different dynamic. Can you guys relate, or do I need therapy?
Yeah, she's
Oh,
naggy
Husband.
and all this. Yeah.
Usually it carries more weight.
yeah, when
So-
it comes from another guy, it seems to just be guys, busting each other's giggleberries. But it sounds like a real judgmental criticism, a poor valuation coming from others. Is that interesting? So I think that's an example of the cultural kinds of things that go on. But who else wants to throw something in to respond
Well,
to?
I had a patient that was like uh, uh, Italian, and so his perspective of why he's in a dysmetabolic state, which simply means what the one would call pre-diabetes and his overweight, is that the culture congregates around food. So I'm like, great. But you're at an age where you need to be thinking about that in a more high level, because I explained to him, him thinking that he can go at this pace at his age at 57 and lifting all these heavy weights and trying to do things, he's going to burn out from that. So I say you do that when you're younger. Midlife, so to speak, is where you're sustaining what you did when you were younger. And then, as your trainer told you, T, when you get older, the goal is to not lose the muscle and
Right, yeah.
prevent.
Don't hurt yourself.
Right. So he's burning out because he's going in the opposite direction. And so he doesn't have the energy to put into making effective change, but he's blaming his Italianness, if that's a word, on it.
Oh,
And
yeah,
I'm gonna
yeah.
have
Yeah,
to
wants to blame his
explain to him.
heritage. Yeah.
Yeah, so like
Yeah.
that's you can still congregate around food, but do it in a different way. You can make the food different. You can, do other things, but let's not say because you're Italian that this is the cause. I don't think that's
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Don't blame it on a convenient label. But yeah, you're right. There's a whole culture and heritage and traditions that are behind it. Now there's other elements. I think another example of culture, I'll throw this one out, is I think that if we're looking at the way the military operates and tries to train soldiers and all that, they're trying to say, we need you to have maximum productivity at moderate tension. You can't afford to wait for other things to raise your level of tension before you do what we're training you to do.
Mm.
You guys can understand what I'm saying? It's like they have to be more training people to say decisions are made and immediately implemented.
Yeah.
So there is no excuses. There's no yeah, buts. Nope, nope, nope. Once a decision is made, the action will be taken immediately. They are training these individuals to have their threshold of activation lowered, so they're more driven by the logical, functional, practical side of things instead of all
That
this.
makes sense. That makes sense. That's in all physical activity.
You would think like martial arts, right? You don't want to
Yep,
be up here.
absolutely. As they say, I want you to punch faster, harder, and with more accuracy, but with less tension.
All right.
Literally say that. I
Yep.
can feel the tension, and you got to lower that tension, and then you'll be able to punch harder, faster, and more accurate.
Right, because if
Right.
you've got a lot of tension, that's a whole lot of energy that's being misdirected towards
Yep.
truly an optional, if not counterproductive, impact, I guess.
Yeah. That's why they want that non-resistance there. So they're really big on that idea of practicing non-resistance.
That's right.
That's interesting. How, like in war, where you have to make a quick decision, life and death, the tension is so high, and yet you're required to make a decision that really incorporates the neocortex when you're really kind of in a limbic state. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah,
How
I
do
think that
you-
what you're describing is that no matter how well trained, how well prepared soldiers are, it's very different when they get into an actual battle. So we would like for them to be trained so that the moment something is encountered, an automatic behavior is triggered because of their training, because of all this, because we know that they're going to be in a much higher tension environment. We don't want them to have the sloppiness, carelessness, dangerous sorts of things that this additional level of tension is going to trigger. We don't want them to end up in stress. So can you maintain your calm? Can you maintain order? And that's really, even if you're watching a good movie about wartime, it's the level head that's ultimately going to save everybody.
Yeah.
Scully did that, the Hudson, the landing of the plane
There you
on
go.
the Hudson. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You gotta stay
That's the
here. That's-
VUCA. That's what the military called the VUCA, according to the admiral I interviewed before. So I asked him, how do you train soldiers for that? So that idea of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, they trained them. And at the time, he was co-authoring a book called The Sniper Mind. And so they were using neuroscience. And that's why I was talking with them about how do they account for the wind and all these things that could go wrong when they're trying to take an enemy out. And so literally that's how Sully can land a plane, because they have checklists, guidelines that train them to a certain point, but they can deviate up to a certain point even beyond that.
Right, because we don't want them to wait until their level of tension is way the heck up here. We want their threshold to be down here. So that as the level of tension hits a moderate level, that's enough to trigger it. Maybe it doesn't even have to be at a moderate level. Maybe they see some early warning sign, and that's all they needed to see to trigger whatever the productivity actually happens to be.
Yeah, you have to train as realistically as possible 1,000 times, and then when it happens, there's a voice inside of you that says, you've been here before, no big deal.
That's right. That's right.
Do what you've done 1,000 times before.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so do we need more illustrations to understand this whole dynamic about tension and productivity having a relationship? That tension is a tension, but you got to hit your threshold, blah blah blah.
Then you said
if people well, you can, I'll do them next. You go.
No, go ahead, Edie.
I was just wondering, with that, if people invest very little, so their tension isn't that high, but their threshold of activation is low, so to speak.
Yes.
Do they take as big a drop? Does it?
Nope.
I was guessing so. Okay.
Yeah, they don't, because they don't have as far to fall.
Yeah.
You think about that, it's kind of like, look, I got a moderate level of tension. And look, if a moderate level of tension, how do I put this? Think of tension as being the fuel in your tank.
Yes.
If I don't have to expend all this additional tension, then I'm going to have that fuel for me to do other things. And I think that's why I don't collapse as much, because I got energy in reserves, and why I can probably handle so much more than someone would think anyone could handle in such a situation. All that training and conditioning has enabled me to do what needs to be done at a moderate level of tension, or a reasonable level of tension, because I don't want to be overreactive. I don't want a tiny level of tension to trigger a reaction that may truly not be necessary. So, but you get the idea. I'm also saving my own tension.
Yeah, you go into everything you do with a gas tank.
Yeah. Yep.
And you could call that a tension tank.
Exactly, there it is. I mean, tension's a form of energy, stored energy. And that's why I think this collapse is so true, because if we've been driven upgrade, and by the way, in the real nature of change, they don't know what upgrade means. We haven't talked about that yet. So, yep, higher and higher. Yep.
Yes, it's a question. So for someone who has experienced a high level of tension, and find themselves faced with that activity again, and they now have history.
Yep.
Do you think that low to moderate level of tension could cause change to happen because they've experienced it before?
I'm going to say, I think it could go either way. because I think that someone who has experienced a high level tension activity before and is now experiencing it again might say, I handled it before, I can wait a little bit, I can delay. So they'd be waiting for even more tension to come along. Where someone who's on their journey towards greater levels of functionality, that's what the Oracle of the Self is really all about, and hopefully what all of our coaching and training is really all about. That person would say, oh no, I know where this is headed, I'm just going to take care of it now. Right?
Mhm.
So are they going to use the success as an excuse to delay even further next time? Or are they going to use their success as a learning experience that helps them to better recognize and respond?
That's good. That
Yeah.
reminds me of Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You There Won't Get You
Won't
Here,
get
or
you
something
here.
like
Yep, yep,
yeah.
yep. Mhm.
Got you to where you are won't get you to where you want to be. Is that what you're thinking of, Brian?
Right,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, 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 yep. All right, so yeah, threshold, we've got a couple minutes, so let me just tell you where I like to kind of bring this to closure, and then we'll get into this next little section, just proving it all out. Yeah, I think that's going to be a big discussion. So I'll just well, I'm going to put you guys in a series of scenarios, all designed to prove the power of tension. And you can have a lot of conversation around each of these scenarios. So I don't want to try to hurry through that. But what I like to say at the end of this one is that you guys have to apply this to your own behavior and to the behavior of those around you. If the truth is, going back to those circles we talked about, where each circle is filled with a personal change you want to make. Remember, we said you could do that about the changes that you're trying to make for you. Yeah, you want you to change. It may very well be that what you learn from this element about tension of the threshold is that the truth be told, although you intellectually want something to change, the truth is you do not find your current situation troublesome enough to bother doing anything definitive to change it. You need to start by owning that truth. And once you can own that truth, you can say, so, well, what's the real answer going to be then? If the truth is that I don't find the situation troublesome enough, I don't have enough tension to trigger an action to occur, should I just say, obviously it's not important to me, or it's not necessary, or it's not worth it, or there's got to be some way for you to explain why you're not doing it. And if the logic supports your case, well, then please take it off your list. But if the reason why you're not following through is because you don't find your current situation troublesome enough, then what are you looking for? You're looking for someone to make it more problematic? You need somebody to come along and impose greater levels of accountability on you, or police your behaviors, or whatever it is. Is that what you really want? Is that what you know, because I can do that, but rest assured, in my role as a coach, if you
Still
told me that
amazes
all
me
you need
for some
to,
reason. I'm
yeah,
really
that's
amazed by that, because I keep thinking about patients who are in a situation where, you know, if they don't make some improvements, it's not going to get better. That's
right,
not eerie.
right,
So
right,
when you
right.
say it's not troublesome enough, and they're already experiencing pain and the, you know, all these things that come along with inflammation, I don't get it. Like I have
Right,
difficulty with
right.
that top of my
Well,
head
it's
about
interesting that right after this slide, if we're in the more advanced concepts about nature of change, what we say to these people who are grumbling about doing it or go through the motions but don't ultimately follow through and get the job done, these are the people that you want to, and then I put up a little slide that says SOG OTP. Yeah. And I say the last words are get off the pot. So, you know, it's like, you guys with me? There's a joke there. Find it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Got
So,
it.
you're right here. It's Sagatpi. This is it. Either do it or don't ever talk about it again. So
But,
you
but yeah, T, what happens? So when people get to the threshold, they're up in stress.
Yep.
So they're uncomfortable enough, they make the change. But so many people don't. They just
Well, they wait.
absorb. Then
Right.
what? I mean, they just commit suicide, or
Right.
they don't take any positive action. They just dig a deeper hole. What
Right.
do you do? What do you do to
Well,
make
they
sure that,
obviously, okay, what you're talking about is someone who's so far up in stress, they're trapped up in stress. If
yeah,
they're not already in the danger zone, they're headed towards that danger zone. These are people who need intervention. You know, the downgrade maneuvers are certainly there, but the downgrade maneuvers are things we hope someone can self-apply, you know, normalize, simplify, restore, and add resources. These are very, you know, practical, go and do it. But what if you are so panic stricken, you've waited so long that you can't even formulate a sentence about what's going on? You need intervention. Someone needs to step in, take charge of things for you, and, you know, while they help you sort things out. And I think that's how a lot of people end up getting themselves in trouble when they reach a point of no return and have decided suicide is not the point, the path they're going to take. They need somebody to intervene, rescue them, help them.
and it almost becomes a state of comfortable misery, don't you think? But it's all they know. You know what I
It's all
mean?
they know. It's all
They're
they
almost rewarded for their inactivity. Yeah. Okay.
Well, it's amazing. I guess this is my whole point. It's amazing how resilient a human being is. But don't think of it as necessarily being a positive thing. Human beings are able to function and survive under absurd levels of stress. And I'll throw this out as something to think about. Okay, we got stuff going on in multiple places around the world where can you imagine being a child witnessing what these attacks are and, you know, all these fighter jets going overhead and all that? Can you imagine being in absolute fear of your life every moment of every day, day after day after day?
Right.
Okay.
Hearing alarms.
Yeah, I've never experienced that, and I hope I never do, and I hope none of you ever have such an experience in your life. But can you imagine if you get raised and this conflict goes on for years and still you've survived, but you've been exposed to this level of tension for that long? Do you think I'm crazy when I say when it's all said and done, you may very well need to talk to somebody? You know, there's something here that needs to be unpacked. Living at this level of stress for that long has to be damaging, physically, emotionally, intellectually. This is not good for a human, but humans survive it all the time, haven't they?
That's the key word, though, is you're using it, surviving, but the
It's
body
survival.
metabolizes that. So for those people, it's very hard to thrive. You're surviving, but it's hard to thrive.
And it may, and that could take years upon years to change in that individual's life, if ever. If ever. I mean, how long does PTSD take its toll? And, you know, how long does it remain severe? Particularly, and again, I talked about kids just to say their minds are being formed right now.
Exactly.
Can you imagine if living that way in childhood is a normal thing? And then, you know, situations change and now you're part of what we consider a more normal kind of a world. Do you feel like you fit in, or do you feel like this is totally, you know, foreign to you, alien to you, you know? So that's my whole point. So yeah, we can get very comfortable up here. And Edie, that's where I wonder sometimes why people on the street choose to stay on the street,
Right.
you know? I mean, and who are we to judge? Maybe they're onto something. You know, I don't know. I've never lived on the street. I can't tell you. Doesn't seem like it'd be a pleasant experience. But if it's normal for you, then maybe that's normal for you.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, there you go. Yet another uplifting message.
This is really good. This is so applicable and practical. I love it.
Well, I'm glad. And I do hope, you know, people can generalize what we're talking about to life as we know it and live it. But this is supposed to be the oracle of the self. So you guys do make sure that the next time you're finding yourselves in a disconnect between what you want to do and what you're actually doing, stop for a moment and think about, well, where am I on this tension productivity curve? Am I anywhere near the threshold? Have I already gone beyond it and I've just collapsed? You know, am I working on somebody else's goal instead of my own? How did this become my issue anyway? Do I want to continue to invest in it, or should I just toss it aside, get it off my grid, Yeah, so you have to self-apply this for get.
Perfect timing for it as the end of the year. Think about the new year. It's a great
Yep.
time to think
So,
about.
it's certainly a time where people always want to proclaim changes, making those resolutions. But why don't resolutions stick? It's an interesting thing here, because the truth be told, the current situation doesn't bother them enough to do anything definitive to change. Is that what's going on? That's why they're not at their threshold. Why do I even need to make a resolution in order to change a behavior? What's that saying all by itself?
Mhm.
Wow.
Throwing in an element of accountability, thinking like, oh, that'll make all the difference.
But now we're getting into the whole thing where we almost have to hijack our habits. You know what I mean? First we
That's
make
right.
our habits, and then our habits make us. So
We need a
it's
reset.
disrupting that. And
Right,
of course,
right. And you're
yeah,
not going to disrupt it just by changing a goal or making a proclamation everyone
right.
needs to know. Things that you've been doing perhaps for a very long time have led you to the reality you're currently in. We got to
Yeah.
look at a lot more variables than a simple declaration.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All righty. Anyway, we'll pick up where we left off next time. So thank you everybody for joining in. Take care. Bye for now.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Take care, everybody. Great talk.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye now.
Bye.
Double donuts.